August 31st, 1943, USS Independence, somewhere in the Philippine Sea. The morning briefing carried none of the tension that should have accompanied the words fighter pilots heard repeated across every ready room in Task Force 15. First combat mission, new aircraft, untested doctrine. Lieutenant Commander Charles Brewer stood before Fighting Squadron 5, studying faces that revealed the particular mixture of confidence and anxiety that characterized aviators about to fly an aircraft nobody had yet proven in battle. The F6F Hellcat had arrived in the Pacific with a reputation built entirely on test pilot reports and engineering specifications. No confirmed victories, no combat data, no proven tactical doctrine, just numbers on paper that suggested this new Grumman fighter might finally match the aircraft that had dominated Pacific skies since Pearl Harbor. The Mitsubishi A6M0 had established its legend through 2 years of systematic destruction. At Pearl Harbor, Zero pilots had achieved complete air superiority. During the Philippines campaign, they had carved through American pursuit squadrons with losses the United States Army Air Forces preferred not to discuss in official reports. At the Coral Sea, Zero pilots had demonstrated maneuverability that made even experienced American aviators question whether victory was possible. The mathematical reality appeared in every after-action report filed since December 7, 1941. Japanese fighters controlled the initiative. American pilots died defending. The F4F Wildcat, reliable and rugged, had fought the Zero to approximate standstill through tactics that emphasized survival over victory. Navy and Marine pilots had learned to avoid turning engagements. They exploited the Wildcat's superior diving speed. They fought in pairs using the thack weave, a defensive maneuver that protected pilots but rarely created offensive opportunities. The kill ratios spoke clearly. Japanese aviators maintained advantages that tactical innovation could minimize but not eliminate. But the Hellcat represented something different. Brewer understood this, even if the tactical implications remained theoretical until bullets started flying. The specifications impressed. 2,000 horsepower from a Pratt and Whitney R. 2,800 double wasp engine. Maximum speed approaching 400 miles per hour. Rate of climb exceeding 3,000 feet per minute. 650 caliber Browning machine guns mounted in the wings with ammunition capacity that enabled sustained fire. Armor plating, protecting the pilot, the fuel tanks, the engine. Everything the Wildcat lacked, the Hellcat possessed. The mission parameters appeared straightforward. Fighter sweep over Marcus Island, engage any airborne opposition, establish air superiority for subsequent strike operations. Intelligence reported moderate Japanese fighter presence, perhaps a dozen aircraft based at the island's single airfield. What intelligence could not predict was how the untested Hellcat would perform when theory collided with combat reality. At 08:15 hours, 12 F6F Hellcats launched from Independence's flight deck, climbing through clear morning air toward Marcus Island, 200 miles northwest. Brewer led the formation in a loose finger four configuration that balanced visual coverage with tactical flexibility. The pilots maintained radio discipline, their headsets carrying only necessary position reports and altitude confirmations as the formation reached 20,000 feet. The first indication of enemy presence came at 09:42. Brewer spotted aircraft climbing from Marcus, their distinctive silhouettes unmistakable against the ocean surface below. A Kawanishi HAK flying boat, one of Japan's largest patrol aircraft, was attempting to gain altitude for escape toward open ocean. The four-engine flying boat represented an opportunity test the Hellcat's offensive capabilities against a target that could fight back but lacked the maneuverability to evade determined pursuit. Brewer keyed his radio transmitter. Tally 1 Emily bearing 340 Angels 8. Climbing, he pushed the Hellcat into a diving attack that built airspeed rapidly past 350 miles per hour. The acceleration impressed. The Wildcat required careful energy management to maintain speed in combat maneuvers. The Hellcat accelerated like it was designed for exactly this purpose. At 600 yards, Brewer triggered a burst from his 6.50 caliber machine guns. The combined firepower, nearly 4,000 rounds per minute, converged on the flying boat's port wing. The Emily's structure disintegrated under the impact of armor-piercing incendiary ammunition. The wing root exploded in a shower of fuel and metal fragments. The aircraft rolled inverted and began a death spiral toward the ocean surface, 5,000 feet below. First kill. First combat engagement. The Hellcat had proven it could destroy enemy aircraft, but a lumbering patrol plane provided limited data about performance against maneuverable fighters. That test would come later, in skies where Japanese pilots expected to maintain the advantages they had possessed since the war began. The months that followed the Marcus Island mission provided increasing evidence that American fighter aviation had reached a turning point. Through September and October of 1943, F6F Hellcats deployed across multiple carrier task forces, replacing Wildcats in squadron after squadron. The transition occurred with remarkable speed. Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation was producing Hellcats at a rate unprecedented in fighter aviation history, rolling completed aircraft off the Bethpage assembly line at peak production of one fighter every hour around the clock. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. By November, 15 fighting squadrons were flying Hellcats from carriers operating throughout the Central Pacific. The aircraft had demonstrated reliability that impressed maintenance crews accustomed to fighters that demanded constant attention. The Hellcat required minimal field modifications. Its Pratt and Whitney engine proved robust under carrier operating conditions. The wide-track landing gear, hydraulically actuated and rotating 90 degrees during retraction, simplified carrier landings that killed novice pilots in less forgiving aircraft. But reliability meant nothing if the Hellcat could not defeat the Zero in aerial combat. The tactical question remained unanswered through autumn of 1943. American pilots had encountered Japanese fighters in scattered engagements that proved the Hellcat could hold its own. But comprehensive data required large-scale battles against experienced Japanese aviators flying proven tactics. That opportunity arrived on November 20th, 1943, during Operation Galvanic, the American invasion of Tarawa in the Gilbert Islands. Task Force 52 approached the invasion beaches with covering forces that included carriers flying F6F Hellcats in unprecedented numbers. The operation would test American carrier aviation doctrine against Japanese opposition that retained every advantage their pilots had exploited since the war began. The morning of November the 23rd dawned with weather conditions that favored aerial operations. Unlimited visibility extended beyond 100 miles. Scattered cumulus clouds at 8,000 feet provided tactical cover for approaches at medium altitude. American carriers launched combat air patrols at first light, positioning Hellcats at multiple altitude levels to intercept any Japanese response to the invasion fleet, visible from reconnaissance aircraft staging from Japanese-held islands throughout the Gilbert chain. The Japanese reaction arrived at 10:37 hours. Radar operators aboard screening battleships detected aircraft approaching from the northwest, range 100 miles and closing. The formation consisted of 32 fighters and bombers launching from bases at Roy and Maloelap, staging through intermediate airfields to strike American carriers supporting the Tarawa invasion. Japanese commanders had committed their available air strength to a coordinated attack designed to inflict damage that might force withdrawal of American naval forces. Fighter directors aboard Essex and Bunker Hill coordinated intercept vectors, guiding Hellcat formations toward optimal positions for engagement. The system that would prove decisive in subsequent battles was still developing, but the fundamental concept worked effectively. Radar detection provided early warning. Fighter directors issued vectors that positioned American aircraft for advantage. Hellcat pilots followed instructions that put them exactly where tactical doctrine suggested they should be. At 70 miles from the task force, 18 F6F Hellcats from Essex and Bunker Hill intercepted the Japanese formation. The engagement developed rapidly as both forces maneuvered for advantage. Japanese fighters, primarily Zeros, supplemented by several Nakajima B-5N torpedo bombers, maintained formation discipline that had characterized their tactical approach since Pearl Harbor. They expected to fight through American combat air patrol, using the superior maneuverability and climb rate that had defeated every previous American fighter in turning engagements. The Hellcat pilots refused conventional dogfighting. They had trained in tactics derived from 2 years of combat experience, distilled into doctrine that maximized American advantages while negating Japanese strengths. Do not turn with Zeros at low speed. Maintain energy through speed management. Attack from altitude advantage. Use diving attacks that exploit superior structural strength. Escape through climbs that Zeros cannot match. The tactical execution demonstrated systematic application of coordinated principles. Hellcat divisions attacked from altitude, building speed in diving runs that brought them through Japanese formations before enemy pilots could react effectively. The 6 50 caliber machine guns, firing armor-piercing incendiary ammunition, destroyed lightly built Japanese aircraft with devastating efficiency. Zeros that attempted turning engagements found American fighters accelerating away, climbing rapidly, then returning with energy advantages that negated Japanese maneuverability. The engagement lasted 37 minutes. When the last Japanese aircraft broke contact and withdrew toward their bases in the Marshall Islands, 30 enemy aircraft had been confirmed destroyed. The Americans lost 1 Hellcat to combat damage. The pilot recovered by destroyer after successful water landing. The kill ratio, 30-1, exceeded even optimistic projections. More significantly, American pilots returned with consistent reports about Hellcat performance characteristics that validated engineering specifications. The aircraft could outdive the Zero. It could outclimb the Zero above 15,000 feet. It possessed superior speed in level flight. The armor protection enabled pilots to survive hits that would have destroyed Wildcats or Japanese fighters. The 6 50 caliber guns delivered firepower that shredded enemy aircraft with brief firing passes. Japanese pilots who survived the engagement returned to their bases with reports that contradicted everything their training had taught them about American fighters. The new Grumman aircraft did not fight like Wildcats. It refused turning battles. It exploited speed and power advantages through tactics that prevented Japanese pilots from bringing their maneuvering skills to bear. Most disturbing, the American aircraft appeared nearly invulnerable to the 7.7mm machine guns that armed early model Zeros. Japanese pilots reported hits that should have destroyed or disabled American fighters, only to watch Hellcats continue fighting as though undamaged. The psychological implications extended beyond immediate tactical results. For 2 years, Japanese naval aviation had dominated Pacific skies through superior equipment and pilot training. Zero pilots had flown with confidence that came from systematic victory. They had developed tactical doctrine around aircraft capabilities that exceeded anything American industry had produced. The appearance of a fighter that negated those advantages created doubt that statistics alone could not address. By December 1943, intelligence reports crossing Japanese command desks contained increasing references to the new American fighter. Operational analyses detailed performance characteristics that suggested fundamental shifts in the tactical balance. American pilots were exploiting coordination and systematic approaches that transformed individual aircraft into components of larger weapon systems. Japanese formations, operating independently, found themselves overwhelmed by American numerical advantages and coordinated tactics. The implications troubled Japanese air commanders who understood that industrial capacity determined long-term outcomes. The United States was producing fighters, training pilots, and deploying carrier task forces at rates Japan could not match. Every month that passed saw more American carriers entering service, more Hellcat squadrons reaching operational status, more pilots graduating from training programs that emphasized standardized tactics over individual initiative. Lieutenant Commander Shirane Ayao, stationed at Rabaul, with the 582nd Kokutai, had flown against American fighters since the opening campaigns of the Pacific War. His personal victory count stood at 16, confirmed kills earned through 18 months of combat from the Solomons to New Guinea. Charron understood aircraft performance, tactical doctrine, and pilot psychology with expertise that separated veteran aviators from replacement pilots who measured survival in weeks. What troubled him most about the intelligence reports crossing his desk was not the Hellcat's performance specifications, impressive though they were, but the systematic nature of American tactics. Japanese fighter doctrine emphasized individual skill and aircraft maneuverability. Pilots trained to exploit the Zero's superior turning ability through close-range combat that showcased flying expertise. The approach had worked for 2 years because American fighters lacked the speed and climb rate to escape unfavorable engagements. The Hellcat changed that calculation completely. American pilots no longer needed to turn with Japanese fighters. They could refuse disadvantageous combat through superior speed, then return with energy advantages that created firing opportunities Japanese pilots could not counter. The tactical revolution was not primarily about aircraft specifications. It was about doctrine that maximized advantages while minimizing opponent strengths. Charron recognized the pattern from historical analysis he had studied at Etojima Naval Academy during the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 through 1905. Japanese naval forces had defeated superior Russian fleets through tactics that exploited speed and coordination advantages. Admiral Togo Heihachiro had refused to fight the war the Russians expected, instead imposing tactical frameworks that negated Russian advantages in armor and firepower. The Americans were now doing exactly the same thing. They had studied Japanese capabilities, identified weaknesses, and developed systematic approaches to exploit those weaknesses while protecting their own vulnerabilities. The comparison troubled Charron because it suggested that individual pilot skill, no matter how developed, could not overcome systematic disadvantages. The Zero remained more maneuverable than the Hellcat at low speeds. Japanese pilots still possessed superior training in aerobatic combat techniques, but those advantages meant nothing if American pilots refused to fight where Japanese strengths could dominate. By January 1944, the pattern had become unmistakable. Every engagement between Hellcats and Zeros followed similar tactical development. American fighters maintained altitude advantage. They attacked in coordinated divisions. They exploited speed to engage and disengage at will. Japanese formations, attempting to force turning combat, found themselves fighting opponents that accelerated away whenever the tactical situation favored Japanese maneuverability. The kill ratios reflected systematic American advantages. In engagements across the Marshall Islands during January and February 1944, Hellcat squadrons achieved exchange rates that averaged 10 to 1. Japanese pilots were dying, not because they lacked courage or skill, but because they were fighting an opponent that had solved the tactical problems that made the Zero effective. The implications extended beyond immediate combat results to questions about Japanese aircraft development and pilot training programs. The Zero had entered service in 1940 as a revolutionary fighter that exceeded contemporaries in range, climb rate, and maneuverability. Japanese designers had accepted trade-offs in armor protection and structural strength to achieve performance advantages that dominated the opening campaigns of the Pacific War. But by 1944, those design compromises had become fatal vulnerabilities. American engineers had developed fighters that matched or exceeded Zero performance in crucial areas while maintaining armor and firepower the Japanese designers had sacrificed. The Hellcat weighed nearly twice as much as the Zero, yet its powerful, engine-enabled performance that matched Japanese aircraft in speed and exceeded them in climb rate at altitude. The engineering philosophy reflected different approaches to fighter design. Japanese aviation emphasized weight reduction to maximize performance. Every kilogram eliminated from airframe structure enabled better climb rate or greater range. The approach produced aircraft that performed brilliantly in the hands of skilled pilots, but provided minimal protection when hit by enemy fire. American designers had prioritized pilot survival and aircraft durability. The Hellcat incorporated armor plating around the cockpit, self-sealing fuel tanks, and robust structural design that enabled the aircraft to absorb battle damage and continue fighting. The additional weight required more powerful engines, but American industrial capacity provided that power through engines Japanese industry could not duplicate. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 and double wasp engine that powered the Hellcat represented American industrial achievement that extended beyond individual component design. The engine produced 2,000 horsepower reliably under combat conditions. It required less maintenance than equivalent Japanese engines. It consumed fuel available throughout the American supply network. The entire system, from design through production through logistics support, functioned with efficiency that Japanese industrial infrastructure could not match. By March 1944, Japanese naval aviation faced systematic disadvantages that tactical innovation alone could not address. American carriers outnumbered Japanese carriers. American aircraft production exceeded Japanese output by ratios that grew wider each month. American pilot training programs produced aviators in numbers that replaced combat losses while expanding force structure. The Japanese training pipeline had collapsed under the weight of losses that eliminated experienced instructors and shortened training cycles to levels that produced replacement pilots with minimal flight hours. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 would demonstrate conclusively that Japanese naval aviation could no longer contest American air superiority in the Pacific theater. What American pilots would nickname the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot represented the culmination of systematic advantages that had developed over 18 months of Hellcat operations. June 19, 1944 began with weather conditions that veteran Pacific aviators recognized as perfect for long-range carrier operations. Unlimited visibility extended beyond 150 miles. Scattered cumulus clouds at 8,000 feet provided tactical cover for medium-altitude approaches. The morning briefing aboard USS Lexington had identified the threat. Vice Admiral Chisaburo Ozawa's mobile fleet, 9 Japanese carriers with approximately 430 aircraft, was approaching from the west. The Japanese plan, Operation A-Go, represented Tokyo's last attempt to achieve decisive battle that might stop American momentum toward the Philippines and the home islands. Task Force 58, under Admiral Mark Mitcher, had positioned itself to cover the American invasion of Saipan in the Mariana Islands. 15 American carriers deployed nearly 1,000 aircraft, including 480 F6F Hellcats that would bear primary responsibility for fleet defense. The numerical advantage favored the Americans, but Japanese commanders believed their aircraft's superior range would enable attacks from distances American fighters could not match. Japanese pilots could strike from 200 miles out, land on Guam to refuel and rearm, then return to their carriers. The shuttle bombing concept assumed American defenses would be overwhelmed by attacks from multiple directions simultaneously. What Ozawa could not know was that American submarines had already spotted his fleet. USS Flying Fish and USS Seahorse had detected his carriers on June 15th. American intelligence had broken Japanese operational codes. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding the Fifth Fleet, knew Ozawa was coming and had positioned his forces accordingly. The element of surprise that had characterized Japanese operations since Pearl Harbor no longer existed. At 10:07 hours, radar operators aboard USS Lexington detected the first Japanese raid, 69 aircraft at 130 miles range closing from the west. Fighter directors across the task force coordinated interception vectors, guiding Hellcat formations toward optimal positions. The system that had been developed over 2 years of combat experience functioned with practiced precision. Radar detection provided early warning. Fighter directors issued vectors that positioned American aircraft for maximum advantage. Hellcat pilots followed instructions that placed them exactly where tactical doctrine suggested they should be. Lieutenant Alexander Vrachu, flying from Lexington with Fighting Squadron 16, was among the Hellcats scrambled to intercept. Vrachu had already achieved ace status with multiple confirmed victories, but what he was about to witness would exceed anything he had experienced in previous engagements. The Japanese formation, primarily Yokosuka D4Y dive bombers with 0 escorts, maintained formation discipline that characterized their tactical doctrine. They expected to fight through American combat air patrol using coordination and determination that had succeeded in earlier battles. The Hellcats intercepted at 70 miles from the task force. Vrachu's division attacked from altitude, diving through the Japanese formation with speed that prevented effective defensive response. His 650 caliber machine guns opened fire at 400 yards. The first Japanese bomber exploded under the impact of armor-piercing incendiary ammunition. Vrachu rolled into position, behind a second target. Another burst, another kill. The engagement developed into systematic destruction as Hellcat divisions attacked from multiple directions, coordinating their assault through radio communication that enabled them to concentrate firepower without interfering with each other's attack runs. In 8 minutes, Vrachu shot down 6 Japanese aircraft. His wingman destroyed 4 more. Across the engagement area, similar results were occurring as Hellcat pilots exploited every advantage their training and aircraft provided. The Japanese formation disintegrated under the assault. Individual aircraft attempted to press attacks toward the carriers, but additional Hellcat divisions intercepted them. Anti-aircraft fire from screening battleships and cruisers created a barrier of exploding shells that destroyed Japanese aircraft that penetrated the fighter screen. By 10:40 hours, the first raid had been annihilated. 42 of 69 Japanese aircraft destroyed. The remainder scattered or damaged beyond combat effectiveness. 0 hits on American carriers. The Americans lost 1 Hellcat in the engagement. The pilot recovered by destroyer after successful water landing. The pattern repeated throughout the day. At 11:07 hours, radar detected the second raid. 109 aircraft approaching from the northwest. Fighter directors coordinated intercepts across multiple carriers. Essex took primary responsibility. Lexington supported. Bunker Hill launched additional fighters. The Hellcats, already airborne from the first engagement, reformed and repositioned based on new vectors. The Japanese formation flew straight ahead, maintaining formation discipline, exactly as doctrine prescribed. But doctrine assumed the enemy was blind. The Hellcats hit them 60 miles out, attacking with coordinated precision that destroyed 70 Japanese aircraft before the raid reached the American task force. 4 Japanese bombers broke through the fighter screen and attempted attacks against the carriers. Near misses caused minor damage. No direct hits. All 4 attackers were shot down by anti-aircraft fire. The second raid had been destroyed with even greater efficiency than the first. The third raid arrived at 1300 hours. 47 aircraft from the north, same pattern. Detection, plotting, vectors, intercept. 7 Japanese aircraft were shot down in the initial contact. The remainder turned back without pressing the attack. Japanese pilots were beginning to understand they were flying into coordinated defenses they could not penetrate, but they had no way to communicate the nature of those defenses to commanders who had not experienced radar-directed fighter control. The fourth raid, launched between 1000 and 1130 hours, consisted of 82 aircraft that could not locate the American fleet. Navigation errors compounded by combat stress caused the formation to circle and search while burning fuel. Eventually, they headed for Guam to land and refuel. Fighter directors detected them on radar heading toward a rotate field. Hellcats from multiple carriers were vectored to intercept over Guam. 27 American fighters arrived over the airfield as Japanese aircraft were circling to land. Fuel low, defenses down, completely vulnerable. The American fighters attacked with devastating effect. 30 Japanese aircraft were shot down over the field. 19 managed to land but were damaged by strafing runs. 0 effective aircraft remaining from that raid. By 1600 hours, the battle was over. Japanese losses for June 19th exceeded 346 carrier aircraft destroyed. American losses totaled 29 aircraft in air-to-air combat. The kill ratio, approximately 12-1, exceeded even optimistic projections. But the statistical disparity did not fully capture what had occurred. Japanese naval aviation had suffered a defeat so complete that it would never recover operationally. The Japanese pilots who survived returned to their carriers with reports that contradicted everything their training had taught them about aerial combat. The Americans were not fighting conventionally. They appeared at perfect positions every time. No matter how Japanese formations maneuvered, American fighters were waiting, positioned by some invisible coordination system that Japanese commanders could not understand or counter. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. What the Japanese pilots could not see were the combat information centers aboard American carriers. They could not see the radar operators watching green phosphorescent blips on circular screens. They could not see the fighter directors with radio microphones issuing calm vectors to Hellcat pilots. They could not see the teams working together with rehearsed precision. They saw only the results. Hellcats appearing from perfect positions every single time. The human cost of the battle extended beyond aircraft losses. The carrier Taiho, Vice Admiral Ozawa's flagship, had been torpedoed by USS Albacore that morning. The damage seemed minor initially, but ruptured fuel lines filled the ship with explosive vapors. At 15:28 hours that afternoon, a spark ignited the vapor cloud. Taiho exploded from within. Secondary explosions ripped through the carrier. She sank at 16:28 with 1,650 crew members. 1,500 men died. USS Kavala torpedoed the carrier Shokaku at 11:18 hours. 3 torpedoes struck the veteran carrier that had participated in the Pearl Harbor attack and fought at Coral Sea and Santa Cruz. Aviation fuel fires spread rapidly. Damage control could not contain them. At 12:10, the captain ordered, "Abandon ship." At 15:04, Shokaku exploded and sank. 887 crew members died. The loss of 2 fleet carriers compounded the disaster of losing 346 aircraft. But the human cost was even more devastating. Japan had started the war with approximately 3,500 highly trained carrier pilots. By June 1944, fewer than 1,000 experienced pilots remained. The training program could not replace losses, fuel shortages, limited flight training. New pilots received 3 months of instruction, where pre-war pilots had trained for 2 years. The quality gap was enormous. The Battle of the Philippine Sea destroyed what remained of Japan's experienced pilot corps. On June 20th, American forces went on the offensive. Admiral Mitchell launched strikes against the retreating Japanese fleet. American pilots found Ozawa's carriers late in the afternoon at extreme range, near the limit of Hellcat operational radius. The strike damaged several carriers and sank the fleet oiler Genyo Maru. But the timing forced American pilots to return in darkness with minimal fuel reserves. Many ran out of fuel and ditched at sea. Some crashed attempting night landings on carriers. Mitchell made a controversial decision. He ordered every ship in the task force to turn on its lights. Navigation lights, searchlights, signal lamps, anything to guide pilots home. The illumination made Task Force 58 visible for miles. Japanese submarines could have attacked, but Mitchell believed saving pilots mattered more than maintaining blackout discipline. Most pilots found carriers and landed safely. Rescue operations continued through the night. The final count showed 20 American aircraft lost in combat on June 20th. 80 lost to fuel exhaustion or landing accidents. But most of the aircrew survived. American combat search and rescue was as systematic and effective as American air defense. The 2-day battle ended Japanese hopes of defeating the American advance through naval aviation. Over the 2 days, the Japanese lost 476 aircraft. 3 carriers sank. The Americans lost 130 aircraft total, but suffered no damage to carriers that would affect continued operations. The strategic implications were immediate and permanent. Japanese carrier aviation would never again threaten American naval operations in the Pacific. The Hellcat's performance during the Philippine Sea battle validated every engineering decision and tactical innovation that had been developed since the aircraft entered service. The kill ratio achieved during those 2 days, approximately 19-1 when combining all combat losses against victories, represented the culmination of systematic advantages in aircraft design, pilot training, and coordinated tactics. Lieutenant Alexander Vracu's 6 victories in a single engagement became symbolic of Hellcat effectiveness. When he landed aboard Lexington, deck crew photographed him, holding up 6 fingers to represent his kills. The image appeared in newspapers across America, providing visual confirmation of American air superiority that boosted morale on the home front and within military forces throughout the Pacific Theater. But Vracu's achievement was not unique. Multiple Hellcat pilots achieved similar results during the battle. The aircraft enabled skilled aviators to exploit tactical advantages that would have been impossible in earlier fighters. The armor protection kept pilots alive when hit by return fire. The 6 .50 caliber machine guns delivered firepower that destroyed lightly built Japanese aircraft with brief firing passes. The superior speed and climb rate enabled pilots to control engagement geometry, attacking when advantageous and escaping when threatened. The psychological impact on Japanese naval aviation extended far beyond immediate tactical defeats. Japanese pilots who had survived the battle carried knowledge that fundamentally undermined confidence. The Invincible Zero, master of Pacific skies since Pearl Harbor, had been systematically outfought by aircraft Japanese intelligence, had initially dismissed. Fear replaced confidence in veteran pilots who had never experienced comprehensive tactical defeat on such massive scale. Japanese commanders recognized that conventional carrier operations could no longer achieve strategic objectives. The quality gap in pilot training could not be addressed quickly enough to restore parity. The industrial capacity to replace aircraft losses did not exist. American production was overwhelming Japanese manufacturing capability. In 1943, Japan produced 7.8 million tons of military equipment. The United States produced 90 million tons. The disparity was increasing monthly. The desperate solution that emerged from this recognition was the kamikaze. If Japanese pilots could no longer survive long enough to bomb American carriers conventionally, they could at least crash their aircraft into targets and guarantee some damage. The suicide tactics that began in October 1944 were partly a response to the conventional attack failures at Philippine Sea. The battle had demonstrated that traditional carrier aviation could no longer function against American defenses. Desperation replaced tactical doctrine. For the United States, the Battle of the Philippine Sea confirmed that the island-hopping strategy would succeed. American forces secured Saipan by July 9th, despite fierce Japanese resistance. Tinian fell on August 1st. Guam was recaptured by August 10th. The Marianas provided bases for B-29 Superfortress bombers. From Saipan and Tinian, American bombers could reach Tokyo. The strategic bombing campaign against Japan's home islands began in November 1944. The Marianas bases made that campaign possible. American control of the Marianas was secured by the carrier battle that destroyed Japanese naval aviation on June 19th. Broader implications extended beyond immediate military operations to questions about future warfare. The Hellcat had demonstrated that systematic integration of technology, training, and doctrine could overcome individual warrior skill regardless of courage or determination. Japanese pilots had fought bravely. They had trained intensively. They possessed tactical knowledge, refined through years of combat experience. But they had been defeated by an opponent that refused to fight on Japanese terms and exploited systematic advantages Japanese forces could not match. By August 1945, when the war ended, F6F Hellcats had been credited with destroying 5,156 enemy aircraft. This represented 75% of all United States Navy and Marine Corps air-to-air victories during the Pacific War. The 19-to-1 kill ratio achieved by Hellcats remained unprecedented in fighter aviation history. No other aircraft of World War II achieved comparable statistical dominance against determined opposition. The engineering philosophy that produced the Hellcat influenced post-war fighter development throughout American military aviation. The emphasis on pilot survivability through armor protection became standard design practice. The focus on reliable mechanical systems that could function under combat stress without requiring excessive maintenance informed subsequent aircraft programs. The integration of powerful engines with robust airframes established principles that guided jet fighter development through the Korean conflict and beyond. The tactical lessons learned through Hellcat operations proved equally influential. The coordinated fighting techniques that Marine Fighting Squadron 214 and carrier squadrons had developed became standard doctrine for American fighter operations. The emphasis on mutual support through division tactics, the exploitation of energy management principles, the systematic approach to engagement geometry, all became foundational concepts taught in fighter pilot training programs for decades after the war concluded. The statistical achievement of the Hellcat can be understood through comparison with other fighters of the era. The British Supermarine Spitfire, legendary for its performance during the Battle of Britain, achieved kill ratios that varied significantly depending on theatre and opponent, but generally remained below 5-to-1 in aerial combat. The German Messerschmitt Bf 109, flown by some of history's highest-scoring aces, operated in environments where kill ratios varied dramatically based on opponent quality and tactical circumstances. The Soviet Yakovlev Yak-3 achieved impressive results on the Eastern Front, but never faced opposition with the systematic coordination that characterized Pacific naval warfare. The Hellcat's 19-to-1 ratio emerged from specific circumstances that combined aircraft capabilities with systematic tactical, doctrine, and comprehensive training programs. But those circumstances were not accidental. They resulted from institutional decisions about how to develop, produce, and employ fighters in modern warfare. The United States Navy had studied combat lessons systematically. They had identified requirements for carrier fighters based on actual combat experience rather than theoretical assumptions. They had worked with Grumman engineers to translate those requirements into aircraft specifications. They had developed training programs that prepared pilots for the specific challenges of carrier warfare. They had created tactical doctrine that maximized aircraft advantages while minimizing opponent strengths. The integration of these separate efforts produced results that exceeded the sum of individual components. The Hellcat was a good aircraft, but not miraculous. Japanese Zero pilots flying with 1944 American training and tactical doctrine would have achieved similar results against undertrained opponents flying obsolescent aircraft. The decisive factor was not primarily the hardware. It was the system that employed that hardware effectively. The memorial photographs that survive from the Battle of the Philippine Sea show young men standing on carrier flight decks, gesturing about engagements they had survived, explaining tactical maneuvers to intelligence officers who documented every detail for analysis and dissemination to other squadrons. These photographs captured a moment when American naval aviation achieved comprehensive superiority that would never again be seriously challenged during the Pacific War. The cost of that superiority, measured in Japanese lives lost and aircraft destroyed, was staggering. The young men who flew Zero fighters on June 19, 1944, were not different in courage or determination from their American opponents. They had trained as intensively as fuel shortages and time constraints permitted. They had flown toward American carriers, believing they were executing tactics that had succeeded in previous battles. They could not have known they were flying into coordinated defenses that made their training obsolete and their courage irrelevant. The technological and tactical gap that the Battle of the Philippine Sea revealed had opened gradually over 2 years of combat. It was not visible in any single engagement prior to June 1944 dudes. But each small advantage American forces had gained, each incremental improvement in aircraft performance, Each refinement in tactical doctrine, each enhancement in radar and communication systems had accumulated into comprehensive superiority that manifested decisively when concentrated force met concentrated force in open ocean battle. The Japanese officers who analyzed what had happened at Philippine Sea understood that conventional responses could not address the systematic disadvantages their forces faced. Some recommended accelerated pilot training programs, but fuel shortages and the loss of experienced instructors made rapid improvement impossible. Others suggested developing new aircraft with performance characteristics that could match American fighters, but industrial capacity and raw material shortages prevented implementation of advanced designs. A few recognized that the war was lost and recommended negotiated settlement, but political circumstances made such recommendations unacceptable to military leadership, committed to continued resistance. The institutional responses that might have addressed Japanese disadvantages required years to implement. Japan no longer had years. The momentum of American industrial production was accelerating. Every month brought more carriers into service, more aircraft rolling off assembly lines, more pilots graduating from training programs. The balance of power was shifting irreversibly toward American dominance. By December 1944, F6F Hellcats were operating from carriers throughout the Pacific theater. The aircraft had become the standard fighter for fleet carriers, with Corsairs supplementing Hellcat squadrons in some units. The coordination between different fighter types demonstrated the flexibility of American tactical doctrine. Hellcats provided fleet defense and combat air patrol. Corsairs, with slightly superior performance at altitude, flew fighter sweeps and ground attack missions. The combination maximized available resources while maintaining comprehensive air superiority. The final accounting of Hellcat performance extended beyond statistical achievements to human stories of aviators who survived combat experiences that should have been fatal. Hellcat pilots returned from engagements with aircraft so damaged that mechanics wondered how the aircraft remained flyable. Bullet holes through wings and fuselage, damaged control surfaces, engines running on partial power. The robust construction that Grumman engineers had designed into the aircraft saved lives repeatedly throughout the war. The nickname Grumman Ironworks reflected industry recognition that Grumman aircraft were built to survive battle damage. The Wildcat had established that reputation. The Hellcat reinforced it. The Avenger torpedo bomber continued the tradition. Pilots who flew Grumman aircraft developed confidence that the aircraft would bring them home even when severely damaged. That confidence enabled aggressive tactical employment that would have been reckless in less durable aircraft. The production achievement that enabled Hellcat deployment across the entire Pacific theater was as impressive as the aircraft's combat record. Grumman manufactured 12,275 Hellcats between 1942 and 1945. At peak production, one complete fighter rolled off the Bethpage assembly line every hour around the clock. The manufacturing efficiency that made this possible required systematic approaches to industrial production that paralleled the systematic approaches to tactical doctrine that made the aircraft effective in combat. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.